Is this also a thing in Washington? I hope I'm saying the proper thing. I think it's in Maryland, but basically, when you are released, you owe a state a percentage of what they paid to house you, and they start charging you. I think about 6 months after your release, whether you're working or not working. It's like you have to make payments on it, like a student loan. Is that
Well,
also a thing in Washington?
definitely yes. That's a practice that I think that is probably across the United States. You know, is
What's it called? What's the proper terminology for it?
well the proper terminology is LFOs, legal financial obligations. So when
So, Will, sorry to cut you, bro. I gotta ask you this as a rational, brilliant black man, right? How is it possible if I've been incarcerated, right, for whatever period of time, whether I did a year, 3 years, or 5 years, I've been a year, 3 year, 5 years out of the workforce. We already acknowledge there's a high probability that I won't get a job, and if I get a job, it's not a livable wage. How am I supposed to take on the burden of making back payments to the state?
that's a part of the trick. That's why it's systematized. It's really a part of the trick of, no different than child support. It doesn't help the family become that much more economically advantaged. It actually disproportions, the family's growing potential, right? It restricts that. It doesn't allow those things to take place as much as mom or dad or whoever might be getting a check. It's not growing the earning potential of the family. So it's systemic. It's the same thing when now you heap upon that person this other conditional layer who comes out with a family, has children, still paying child support, still paying off their LFOs. Um, what happens is when a person is sentenced to a crime, a part of that consequence is they make you pay what they call as LFOs, legal financial obligations. By the time I came home, I had over $36,000 in debt, right, over the year because you also have an interest. So they give you an interest. If you don't pay it off within a 12-month period of time, you get this high up interest that
Hold on,
moves
bro. How you
that
gonna pay it off in 12 months? You just did a 20-year bid.
my LFO when I my LFO was about I think it was like $2,000. By the time I left with interest, it was over 36,000 because of the interest that it accrued over the time period of not being able to pay it off. I didn't have a job prior to my incarceration. I
That's
didn't have no
crazy.
savings. I didn't do any banking. I didn't know any of those things. And so that becomes a part of now when you're placed on what they call community supervision, it's like being on parole, coming out of doing your time. That is the requirement. You got to when you come and report to your parole officer or whatever here in the state of Washington as community supervisor. You report to them. That's a part of the requirement. They'll send you the notice in the mail. This is how much you need to. This is how much you owe, and this is how much you need to pay. And when you show up, you better show up with some money. And they got a kiosk where you can go in when you walk into the facility to report. Sometimes you don't even have to have a face to face. Let's say, for example, you got to report twice a month. One of those encounters might be face to face. The other encounter is strictly through the kiosk machine. So that means you go to the kiosk machine, you put your hand in there, it reads whatever, it scans your hand, your information pops up, and then it gives you the opportunity to how you need to pay down some of that legal financial obligation. But that's accrued over time for most people while they're incarcerated and they get out with a hefty. That's man, it's that's criminal in itself. Like I s-
What happens if you don't pay? Do they lock you up again, or do they siphon money from your check?
so what happens if they don't pay when it comes to the legal financial obligations? There's a lot of things that can take place. It can mess with your credit. They can
Bro, it can mess with your credit.
yeah, it can mess with your credit because it shows it shows that you're in debt. It's almost like I ain't gonna say a loan, but it shows you're in debt and you're not paying this debt off. So that debt can be counted against you in terms of your credit. There's a lot of different impacts that not paying your LFOs off can have on you. Um, if a person is incarcerated, right? When they're receiving money, whether they're working and getting money from home, it gets double taxed. So the money that you get sent in if it's, $50, they'll have a percentage that says how much of that $50 you can get. So they'll base it off of all the things you owe. COI is one of them, which is cost of incarceration. So not only if you're paying your LFO, but your COI, meaning that you have to pay for, let's say if they got television programming in there, they're going to take $2 from that from each person who's incarcerated. They'll take about $2. They'll take a percentage off for basically like electricity and all these different things that keep the prison functioning. So you're paying about $8 or $7 that goes to COI, which is cost of incarceration. Whatever they detail it as, that's what it becomes. And then they take a percentage for your LFOs. Then they take a percentage if you happen to owe child support. They take a percentage of all these different things that end up impairing you for having any kind of economic mobility moving forward. So when you come home, even though you were making those payments, you weren't making enough in an adequate amount of time and space because they was taking 70, some people they take 95% of their money. So if I send you $100, you're getting $5 out of that. So what happens is you could never even make up the space to be able to pay off these debts. So even though I was still paying towards my LFOs and all of that when I was incarcerated, I didn't make enough in the span of the 12 months. So I got the interest rate and then I get out. Now it's go from $2,000 to over $36,000 that I have to pay. And that still impacts me on my credit score. If you have a CCO, which is a community corrections officer, once again, or parole officer, that is not cool. Yes, they can violate you. They can say, hey man, you ain't made payment in the last 2 times. We need you to make a payment. I don't care if it's $10. What can you pledge towards this? Just like you was in prison, they took $2 from you. You can probably give us 5 or 10. So yeah, it is a threat to your freedom, and also your earning potential and what you can get qualified for in terms of maybe a house or a vehicle. Those things can have impacts on it.